Warm welcome for Lauren, please.
Hello. I wasn't actually expecting to have a microphone, so I planned loads of interesting things to do with my hands, but I won't need to do them now. My name is Lauren, and I set up my own indie studio in 2015 with my business partner, Ryan, who couldn't be here today, which is unfortunate, but there we go. What I want to talk to you guys about today is how, in my experience, if I had started using UX much earlier, I would have saved myself a lot of time, tears, and money. So hopefully those of you who are considering making your own game or setting up your own studio can learn from my mistakes. So what's interesting about what I've done, I think, is that I've made the same game 3 times, and each time I have approached it in a very different way with regards to the UX, and each time I've made a very different game. So I think it's a really good exemplar of how UX affects the game that you're making and how it can improve it or not improve it, as the case may be. So I think it's wise just to kind of say how hard it is to make a game. I don't know if anyone here is making a game or has made a game. Show of hands, anyone that's making a game? Awesome, great. I think for mobile, Joanna's talk really highlighted how important it is to design for touch. So I think it's just one of these things that until you try it, you don't really realize how difficult it is. So I thank you for setting that up. That was very helpful. So why is it so hard to make a game? Well, from my experience, I think it's difficult because you're dealing with something that has no real blueprint. A game can be anything. It can be a mobile game, it can be a platformer, it can be now it can be a VR experience, an AR experience. So how do you design something which can be anything to be played on anything by anyone? It's no surprise that making a game is one of the hardest things that I know that I've ever done, and I think most people can agree that it's a pain in the ass trying to do it and trying to make money doing it, which makes it even harder. I think as an indie, it's really hard that you make wise decisions with your money and time because it's so limited. There are there's no shareholders to get you out of trouble. There's no support from a larger team to help you fix problems. You kind of have to fix it by yourself. So knowing what you're doing before you set out is really important. I don't want anyone to think this is going to be a depressing talk because it's not that depressing. It is a hopefully inspiring talk. And there's a reason we call it game development and not game assembly or game paint by numbers, other than the fact that those names really suck. It is an evolving process, and it's supposed to be fun. You are making a game after all. And it's why we love games and why we want to make them better. So hopefully no one will be depressed by this talk. So this is our production timeline. So we started in 2015, and obviously now we're in 2018, and we're about to launch our first game. The journey has been, although this graph shows a kind of upward trend, I think that's probably inaccurate for the emotional roller coaster that it's been. It should probably be more like this. So what is Powerless? So Powerless is an interactive fiction game for mobile, but is also going to be released on Steam. And the main mechanic of the game is choosing narrative options in a piece of fiction, which then affects your experience in the rest of the game. The premise of the game was based on a novel that Ryan and I were working on, which was about what would happen if a huge solar flare hit the Earth and wiped out all of electricity. We are so dependent now on electricity on our mobile devices, on our laptops, on phones. How would anyone be able to survive without electricity? Even just simple things like having running water or heating and getting food. We really wanted to showcase how difficult it would be in modern life to adapt to a world that was analog. And that's always been the heart of the game. Through all iterations, that has been the main inspiration to highlight how feeble and weak human beings are. That's always been our main intention. So even though the premise of the game has not changed since 2015, the game itself has changed dramatically. So now that I've made the game 3 times, I can now say that how you design a game in terms of your approach to UX is a massive, massive, massive deal. So approach 1, which I call all guns blazing, is when we spent the most amount of time, the most amount of money, and then we deleted everything. It kills me to say that, but it's true. And it's because we didn't know what we were doing, which I think a lot of people maybe don't want to admit, but it's true. So this is our team. I can use this thing here to point out my face. There we go. So we had a big team for what we were trying to do, and we had assembled what we thought was a team of creative and interesting people who were all really behind the idea, which I think is still a crucial thing that we believe in the company. Unlike some projects, we actually started with Crunch rather than finishing with it. Ryan and I were still working at a different job to raise money for this project. So we would get to the office at 5 a.m. and we would write the narratives until 9 a.m. Then we would cry quietly in the corner, and then we would continue working on our day jobs, and then about 6 or 7 we'd meet again, read what we'd written in the morning and realize that it was pretty terrible, cry a bit more, write some more, maybe have a drink, then go home, repeat the next day. So we started in November 2015, and by January we were pretty broken human beings. We were just a mess, but we had written, I think, close to 1 million words, and we were pretty proud that we had done that. I know there are lots of debates in the industry about whether Crunch is worthwhile. I think it's probably not. The amount of work that we had written, we'd created so many words that we couldn't even read them, and we didn't have the resources to read them. We didn't have the money to hire people to read them. It was just, we'd created another problem. We hadn't really solved anything. I've made this graph here of where we put our energies during the sort of production sprint, and I think it's quite clear that there's a lot of where's my pointing thing? So this is us writing this gray line. So we went pretty hard, and then we basically just stopped writing because we were like, well, we've written all the words, we're not going to write them again. And if we have to fix it, we'll do it at the end, which is the worst thing to think. We put loads of time and money into art. We had a pretty big art team, and we wanted to make the style of the game very memorable. We were very self-conscious that we were a small company and that we wanted to be able to compete visually with bigger companies, so we basically put all of our time and money into making the game look cool. We didn't really put as much time into UX, if any, to make it feel fun, because we thought if the game looked cool, it would be fun, which is not true at all. We put a fairly consistent amount of time into development, which makes sense because the game was constantly evolving. But it was mainly evolving because of the art, not because of the UX, and not because of anything we were doing to make the game more fun. So you can see here there's some examples of how the game progressed visually, obviously from the kind of first prototype where it was just boxes to a slightly more evolved style, and then to the finished vibe over here. And I think the game does look pretty cool. We have a video here, which may or may not play. What do I do to make it play? Do I click? Oh. This was a trailer we made. There probably is music, but I forgot to play it. But it's something very classical and moving. So essentially, the first version of the game was the power's gone out, you don't know why. All of London's gone to shit. You have to navigate across the tube map and solve challenges and collect resources and try not to die. And you played as this character called Louis Lincoln, who was a kind of sarcastic idiot. So yeah, we made a trailer. We went to a lot of effort to make it cool. Some more examples of how we progressed the art style. Made a cool map. But the reason we were able to do this is because we had a big art team, as I said, and a developer who worked together and who thankfully got on quite well. Apart from a few upsets due to like demanding changes, they were always pretty happy with one another. Here is our having a very typical discussion about how we should resize things. But that was the one part of the working relationship that I think we got quite right because of literally the physical setup. They were sitting next to each other. In fact, that's where they were sitting, and that's a big jumble of wires that he was probably using. But for me and Ryan, who were still working our day jobs to make money for the game, we weren't there during that process. So we were there with the cleaners at 5 a.m., and we were there afterwards when sometimes the team was available to be there or they weren't. So there was a real disconnect and a real communication problem because we weren't able to see what they were doing and input. We would see it after the fact, and we wouldn't have seen their thought process of why they decided to do something a certain way. Most of the time, we let them do what they wanted, and we gave them free rein to create visually what they wanted to, and I think it worked. But it didn't fix the problem of the fact the game wasn't fun. One of the biggest things that I've learned in the managing of a design team is communication being so important. It's really difficult to prevent what I call the echo chamber, where people don't want to say things that are bad and they say things that are good. This is a little kind of dramatization of some of the conversations we will have, which basically goes like, this is awesome, everything's going to be really cool. Yeah, other games have done it, it's really great. And then someone says, but wait, hey, the player, maybe, no, shush, don't be negative. No, it's really fun. It's going to be fun when it's finished, just wait. Shh, we can't change anything, be quiet. And that just kind of goes round and round and round. And this poor UX person here kind of has to leave the room quietly and not get their input. But it's really important to listen to that person because they hopefully know what they're talking about. And I think if you don't have that person in your team, you should find them because they are the person that will save you lots of time and money. So I know it's hard to understand what was wrong with the game without playing it, but I'll try and explain. So the point of the game was to, the point of the narrative in the game was to escape London because London was falling apart and you had to get to safety. But the game's mechanics were all geared towards staying alive for as long as possible in London. So there was a clear disconnect between what the game was asking you to do and what the narrative was asking you to do, which if we'd played the game more and had potentially the play testing cloud ability, that would have we could have found that earlier on. We did have some people come and test the game for us, and most of the time their question was, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I doing any of these things? And that just obviously is not fun, being confused. It wasn't challenging, it was just confusing, which is not what you want in a game. We also focused on the passing of time. Time was a massive mechanic because we wanted to have this sort of ticking time bomb clock. But because of the way we'd written the narrative, everything had to be simultaneously written at the same time because a player could reach different levels at different points in time, which meant that the game had no consistency and the world building from a narrative point of view was sucky, which is a technical term. So the main things that we learned on that kind of first iteration was you have to be player-centric. You have to think about what the player is going to play. You can't think about how you have to think about how it looks, but I think you have to think about how the player is going to play before you think about how it looks. Narrative design, we had this stupid assumption that words are cheap and that you can change words, which is not true, because if you have 1 million of them, it's really hard to change 1 million words. It's hard to write 1 million words, but it's even harder to change them. And early testing, you have to test as soon as possible. We had this bizarre aversion to testing our own game because we thought we would be too biased, so we made other people test it and we avoided testing it ourselves. And I think that's something that I know other devs do as well, and don't do it. Just don't do it, it's bad. Test your own game. I think it's also really important to check your biases and check why you think something, because of the diagram I showed you with the echo chamber, it's really easy to convince yourself and your team that you're doing the right thing when in fact you're not. So ask random people, ask your grandma, ask the guy on the tube, ask anyone. Question everything. Why are you making this game? Why do you think that the way you're making it is the right way to make it? And also, the loudest team member is not always the most correct. I think as a girl in game development, it's hard to sometimes speak up, but I encourage everyone to make loud noises when appropriate. So after 12 months of crying, basically, we decided that we would start again, and we would reboot the game in a way that was trying to learn from those mistakes. Once again, however, we then just deleted all of it, so I'm kind of spoiling the story a bit early, but that is what happened. So what I wanted to do in this version was to, I did some research about UX and how people design games, and I thought, well, if I learn from what other people have done, I will hopefully improve my chances. Because, as Einstein, or apparently not Einstein, didn't actually say this, I'm not sure who knows who actually said it, but doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is madness. And I hope of many things I may be called mad is not one of them. Maybe it is, but I do think that I learned from my mistakes anyway. So on this iteration, we had learnt that planning the narrative and the narrative design was incredibly important, and that planning the player experience was important. So we changed the way that the team was set up, we changed the team members, we changed the design of the game, but one thing that we forgot to change was crunch. We still did lots of crunching. So here is the graph again of this iteration. One of the key things to notice is the massive disconnect between what I'm doing up here and what everyone else is doing down here. My plan was if I did enough work by myself, I would be able to prevent all of the problems from happening again. So I wrote an 80-page game design document which fleshed out absolutely everything and explained how all the mechanics would work and why it would be fun, and I gathered data and research. I wrote, I think, like 400 different storyboards, 250 pages of story development, and then I started writing about 10,000 words a day of the narrative, which again was a crunchy activity that was not very fun. I also decided that just because the game looked good before didn't mean that we had to stick to that. I didn't want to limit us in our creativity, so I explored loads of different art styles. We added this new girl character because I thought we should have a girl in the game. We experimented with the horizontal layout and having more kind of artistic paintings for the scenery. Then we went back to horizontal and tried another art style. Then we tried another art style. I don't know if anyone here has heard of Inkle Studios, who made 80 Days. Anyone? So we were using their software to write some of the interactive fictions. And this is a video of how big and complicated one of those fiction chapters was. Oh, no. How do I play? I can't play the video. Oh. It doesn't play on here. That's tricksy. I don't want to click it now. Okay. So this was a story which is in the game takes about a minute to play. And I think it was 120,000 words, and it broke Inkle. It could not cope with the amount of story. So what I had done stupidly is through, again, crunching and trying to write too many words, I'd made a game that was, again, impossible to function and was so detailed that it meant that the player had to memorize so many different actions at once to be able to keep on top of what they were doing. So it was just bad. And I had a conference call with Ryan, my partner, and this is when we kind of dramatically realized that the game probably wouldn't work for the second time. This is where I mute him because he is saying something unpleasant. And here we realize that we are once again a bit screwed. So the issue with this game is that I had tried to control everything so much. It was not so much a game, more of a novel. It was a huge, huge novel, which made players feel really bad about themselves based on their moral decisions. And they had to read a lot of words to get to the point where they were told that they were bad humans, which I still think has some value in society, but wasn't the right thing for us at the time for our first game. So the key things I learnt were can't control everything. I am a bit of a control freak, but you can't plan absolutely everything. You can write as many GDCs and storyboards and prototypes as you want, but the game is going to evolve and going to change, and that's what's going to make it better by having input from other people. Stop crunching, stop it. I keep doing it, but I have to stop doing it because you're not going to make good work when you're crunching. Also, don't create in a vacuum. You have to create in a team. From that graph, you can see that I was basically disconnected from the rest of the team. I was working at a speed that they were not working at, and so we weren't collaborating together. I was just demanding things, and they were telling me that it was wrong, and I was ignoring them. So, approach 3, make love, not war. A much more peaceful approach to game design. I think many people would have probably given up making this game by this point, and I'm glad that I haven't. But it has not been easy. So on this graph, which is a lot more fun, everyone is kind of working to the same, beating to the same drum within reason. We have introduced UX much earlier on, and we have more playtesting happening constantly. No more of this. A little bit of that, but not too much. The other biggest change that we've made, I think, is embracing humanity. I say humanity, not diversity, because I feel like that has a forced connotation, like you're trying to make your game diverse, which we're not. The game is set in London and should represent London, so we no longer have Louis, the main character, who was a bit of an idiot. We now have a whole range of characters. We have a Muslim guy, we have a transgender guy, we have a gay guy, we have a Polish guy, we have people from all backgrounds in the game. We have multiple characters you can play, not just one, because it was really important that when you play the game, you can see yourself in it, and not just a white guy called Louis. And I think that's been one of the biggest changes. And even though that's not UX, strictly speaking, I think part of it is because it's about the player's experience, and if the player is experiencing themselves in a game, I think that's more enjoyable. One big thing that we've done is to assess our tools that we were using. First time we built the game was in Corona, which was because that's what we knew, and we were scared to try anything else in case we couldn't do it or we couldn't handle problems that would arise. We switched to Unity last year, and it's made a huge difference. We also use Ink, which is the language that Inkle Studios have created, and it's a slightly more complex version of the web version that I broke previously. It's a really awesome tool, and if anyone's looking to get into interactive fiction, I highly recommend learning how to use it. It's really cool. We also simplified the UI and stopped trying to make the next, stunning visual game, because we didn't have the budget or the resources to do that, and we kind of let that dream go and decided to do something that was in our abilities. So now the game is a much more tech-focused UI, and it's very simple and very clean. It's still being worked on. Here's not a video. I don't like the way videos work here, by the way. It's confusing. Just gonna click it. Okay, no video. We introduced a new character called Maud, who is a cheeky AI robot who guides you through the game so that all of our onboarding and what the hell am I doing here problems are fixed. So she is a character who is basically your little assistant, and she guides you through what you're doing. So I'm just going to summarize things quickly now, because I may have gone over, or I'm not actually sure. So the main things that I think that are kind of watches, it's so weird seeing you take pictures of my slides, is testing. I know Steffi's going to talk about prototyping later, and listen carefully because it's very important. But as soon as you can test your game yourself, as well as with other people, the better. And enjoy that process. Try not to fear it, which I know that I have done, because it will probably teach you things that you didn't realize. People, as I've said here, humans are weird. You're basically getting a group of people together, trying to make something which could be anything and is likely to change at any point. It's very difficult working in a team, especially a team that's trying to make a game. So make sure you're working with people that you like. If you're building an indie team, I think communication is probably more important than talent to a degree, because if you can't communicate your ideas and you can't settle disputes, then what can you do? Technology is always changing in games. The tools that we use, the game platforms that we're going to be releasing on. So don't fear new technology, embrace it, learn it. I now spend most of my time on YouTube learning how to do things that I couldn't do before. I still refuse to use Illustrator because it sucks, but I will use other things. Scheduling, it's kind of impossible to schedule how long it takes something to be fun, and when does it stop. You can always improve a game, you can always make it better, but I think as a commercial enterprise, you have to at some point say stop, that this game needs to be released. And I think anyone that's trying to schedule a game, if you look at my schedules, you would think that I was some kind of sadist, the amount of work I try to schedule in. But as I said, crunching is bad, and scheduling is important to have goals and benchmarks and to stick to them, but be realistic about what you can achieve as a small team. A game is only a game when you play it, and there is this kind of painful cycle of the game was good in theory and it worked well in my storyboards and it made sense when I spoke about it, but then I played it and it sucked. And then now I'm worried that, well, my next version, my next theory, will that suck as well? It's difficult, but the only way you can solve that is by testing and prototyping and repeating that process. Here are some happy people. Again, people are important, so take care of people that you work with and treat them with respect, and I think they will do the same to you. Technology, choose your tools wisely, and scheduling is important. in summary, that is all I have. Thanks.
Okay, if someone have one question? Yes.
So I was wondering, how does the high-tech UI fit to a game which is about a world without power?
Interesting question. So the previous problems that we had in the game was trying to teach the player what they had to do in the game. So in the first version, it was collect resources and get out of London / stay in London. In the second version, it was a moral XP score that allowed you to travel. So if you were a bad person, you got stuck. If you were a good person, you got to travel around. But that limited your exploration of the game because you were only encouraged to do good things and not really explore. And so what was so hard is trying to explain to someone, A, what a solar flare is, B, that all the power is gone and what does that mean, and C, what are they trying to do? So in the new version of the game, it's rather than trying to say that actually the solar flare has happened, we treat it as a simulation. So you're basically a participant in a scientific experiment to see what would happen if the power went out. So that's why you're in this scientific environment, and Maud, the robot, is kind of placing you into these simulations and then reviewing how you've done. So you're less kind of alone in what you're doing. And also the whole point of the game is kind of an experiment to see how people would respond, so it just kind of worked with the heart of the game.
Someone else?
Just a quick one by the time we swap.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I just had a question about the way you managed. You had several reboots, and so you had to run a studio for several years, and potentially, since you were not releasing the game, you had no revenue. So I was curious to know how this was handled and how you managed to go through this.
Did I mention all the crying?
You did.
Yeah. Well, so me and my business partner, Ryan, we raised money personally and through another business we were running, which gave us an amount to do the first iteration of the game. Then during the 12-month hiatus, I did different jobs to raise money. I have served many cocktails. We've had a little bit of funding from outside places, but nothing significant. So it's basically all been self-funded and late nights and lots of work and stuff. So pain, I guess, is the summary to that answer. All done?
Hello. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Lauren.